Coming up this time on the show, we're going to be chatting with Lee Sharp. He's recently revived the MonoWall codebase, now known as SmallWall, and we're going to find out what the future holds for this new addition to the BSD family. BSD Now, episode 97, Big Network, Small Wall, recorded July 8th, 2015. Hey, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Alan Jude.
And we're glad to have you guys with us this week. We got an exciting episode, lots of cool new articles and stuff to talk about, of course. Things are happening in the BSD communities, but we got to get you right to it, of course, here. And to start us off, we got a whole bunch more videos have landed. So as if watching this show isn't enough, now we're going to load you up with a ton of other stuff for the rest of the week. But looks like first up we got some more of the BSDCon videos. Now, does this wrap it all up? Do we have them all now after this?
Think this is almost all of them, but I think there might still be a couple more.
Close. Okay.
But the big one is the Steve Bourne keynote is there.
Yes. Yeah, I was going to say the keynote is finally made it online. That was excellent. Mm-hmm. If you have not seen that yet, you need to go watch that. Not right this second. Yep. Wait until we're done with our episode, but then queue it up and go watch it afterwards because it was fantastic. But in addition, we have a whole slew of other ones that have made it online. Of course, these are all up on YouTube. So we have Nigel Williams talking about multipath TCP for FreeBSD. And of course, Stephen Bourne, who we mentioned, the keynote there, and his talk was titled Early Days of Unix and the Design of Shell, or SH. John Criswell, Protecting FreeBSD with Secure Virtual Architecture. Shani, how do you pronounce his last name?
I don't know how to pronounce her last name.
Okay. Expanding RDMA capability over Ethernet in FreeBSD. I apologize for messing up the last name.
Direct memory access remotely over Ethernet, so that could be really interesting.
Nice. Yeah, that's definitely cool. John Mark Gurney did a talk on adding AES ICM and AES GCM to Open Crypto. Savan Janayan, again, probably mispronounced that. Adventures in Building Open Source Software. And it looks like that one's in two parts, so you'll have to take a look at that. And of course, we even got a video of the BSDCon closing as well. So it's kind of like being there. You get to see all the different parts of it.
The closing was a little hurried this year because the fire drill we had kind of crunched our timeline, and we had to make it to our dinner plans that night.
Did we even mention that on a previous episode? But we all there was a fire. Well, it wasn't a fire drill. There was actually some smoke that set off an alarm apparently
somewhere,
and we all got kicked out of the building.
Somewhere else in the building, not related to BSDCon, some people were trying to cook something and set off the fire alarm, and that interrupted the last set of talks. And so, Dan, told the speakers, I'm not going to cut you off at the end time, but if you could speed up a little bit, that'd be good, so that we can all get to the closing and get that done as quickly as possible, because we had a reservation for dinner for all 280 of us, and we didn't want to be late for that.
We were very timely. It was still a walk, and people needed to have time to go drop bags off at the residence and all that. So it was, but definitely a lot of fun, and we've never had that happen at a BSD conference before that I'm aware of, so that was a first. Yep. But in addition to BSDCon videos, we also got some new ones from Package Source Con. These have started to show up online.
Seven, again, who just talked about his talk at BSDCon, but he was at Package Source Con and talking about what's happened in the last year. Pierre Ponchery talked about Package Source meeting Package NG. That sounds interesting. Jonathan Perkins talked about how they use Package Source at Joyent. Jorg Sonnerberger talked about Package Install's scripting framework for NetBSD. Benny Seigert talked about new features in Bulk Tracker. I'm not sure what that is. And, it's nice to see recordings from Package Source Con, because when we talked about it last year, I wasn't aware there was a Package Source Con, and now I get to see it.
Yeah, that's cool. These videos are all up on Vimeo, so you can fire up your app and go queue those up, watch those. But we encourage you guys, do more of these videos in the future, any of these conferences, because these are fascinating ways to virtually attend, so to speak. Okay, next up in the news this week, we got OpenSense has come out with another release. So it looks like a 15.7 has been released. So this is almost exactly 6 months after the initial release was
this is
made.
the scheduled release
So,
they originally had planned with the whole one release every 6 months on .1 and .7.
Yep.
And, there were 12-point releases on the original one, but we're now actually at 15.7 as scheduled.
Now we're on the schedule, and that's right. So it looks like this one, of course, is bringing in a lot of the latest security fixes from upstream FreeBSD. It includes a new integration of their intrusion detection system, as well as a GUI for it, and new blacklisting options for the proxy servers. That's kind of cool. And also, taking a note from some of the stuff that's happened upstream with PF, it looks like they've finally nuked the Alt-Q traffic shaping support. It's been retired from this release. It was removed from the OpenBSD one a few years ago, so the code now has been completely removed. And it's interesting to see that they have done that. In addition, this is one I was pretty happy to see, was the LibreSSL flavor has now been promoted to production ready. So you can migrate between the two. They actually have updating via the GUI for that. So you can try one, no commitment, don't like it, switch back to whatever the other one was. And that's a pretty neat way to try out LibreSSL.
I also see they borrowed the DummyNet IPNet patch from MonoWall to enable symmetric traffic shaping, even when using that. So that was interesting. And they imported some of the recent changes from the FreeBSD base system, including the TLS Diffie-Hellman logjam interoperability improvements for SendMail, because that was a recent errata notice that was affecting some things.
Okay. And, of course, not to be undone with yet another release. They did another one shortly after this one was announced with some more small fixes. It looks like a couple CVEs went out for Squid and Bind, so they patched those. And then, let's see, some other minor fixes to the UI. DHCP server, a fix there to make it start up properly. So just some minor stuff. But, yeah, those should all be available up on their site and available to upgrade now, too, if you would like to try that out. Okay, next up we have some NetBSD. NetBSD at the Open Source Conference 2015 at Okinawa. And we have a link to that, to the announcement there. So, of course, if you liked last week's episode, then, of course, you're going to know what to expect and what's going to happen at this one here. But the NetBSD users group in Japan has hit yet another open source conference. This time it was in Okinawa. And they had another slew of interesting machines on display that we didn't get to see in the interview last week. So I assume you have those on the screen there, Alan. If you can narrate us through
picture now.
Okay. Any idea what some of these things are?
They were labeled, but I've lost my view of the labels. One second. Sorry. Okay.
Oh, no. So
this one looks like this could be the NetWalker. It's a little indie netbook thing. And they have the 03 from Zarius, which is a little kind of smaller. I don't know how to describe one of those little machines. It's kind of a little keyboard for your thumbs, but with a fold-out screen. It's bigger than a phone. It's kind of like
it's like an old slider cell phone, where
except
you have a
for even
that
bigger,
slides out.
kind of. Yeah, it's like a flip open PDA, kind of like when those were still a thing. They also have an OpenBlock A6, and they're showing up. I don't have the picture of the stickers they were showing off.
Yeah, those are definitely neat. And is there anything NetBSD doesn't run on yet? I think we should just have a smaller list of what it doesn't work on, and we can highlight that every week as it shrinks, right?
It's like, oh yeah, remember how last week we said it doesn't run on this? Well, now it does.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, that list has gotten smaller yet again. So a plug here, our producer has written as well, why don't we see more stuff like this in North America or Europe? So NetBSD developers, if anyone wants to show off some interesting devices, maybe show them off at a Linux conference, for example, I think that would go over pretty well. I'd love to see that at some other conferences as well. But keep up the good work, guys, out in Japan. That's
part of it is a lot of this hardware is just not available outside Japan. But the other thing is, if you look closely in this picture here, that looks like a power bar, except for it's for USB. Because in Japan, everything is powered by USB.
That's right. We charge our electric cars via USB here. Cool. Okay, well, next up in the news, we got OpenBSD, BGP, and VRFS. How's that for a bunch of acronyms, right? So VRFS, though, is a virtual routing and forwarding, or in OpenBSD, our domains, is a simple, powerful, and of course confusing topic. You got to be a real network guy to appreciate some of this. But we got a cool article talking about that, trying to explain some of both BGP and our domains, and it, of course, has some nice network diagrams to help us visualize and conceptualize network isolation goodness. With using multiple R domains, an example what you would do with that is, like, say, having two upstream internet connections, but then lock different groups of your internal network. Say you can only talk to this one, you can only talk to that one, which is pretty cool.
Well, actually, in their first example here, they have one R domain that actually goes out to the internet, and a second one which can't get to the internet. In the second example, like you said, you have one subnet that ends up going out, internet connection number 1, and a second one that uses internet connection number 2. And I've had to,
or one that hits a proxy or filtering or whatever, like the idea of a guest network as well.
Right. I had something similar to that when I first got the fiber connection here. I still had the cable connection, and so I was like, well, the home VLAN can still use the cable, and the office VLAN will go out the internet connection, the fiber connection, because the IP addresses for our fiber geolocate to the US. That's usually good. It means we get US Netflix and so on, without even having to VPN. But it stopped us watching the World Cup soccer because we were trying to watch on the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting thing. And it's like, sorry, you're not in Canada. I'm like, really now?
So you got to set up a VPN to somebody next door.
Well, no, in that case, I made the home VLAN go through our old cable connection that was in Canada.
Oh, okay. So do you still have the cable connection? Is that what you keep it for?
I don't keep it anymore, but at one point I had that, and a complicated setup like this I built, and then I was like, why would I ever want to use the cable again? I'll use I have a gigabit fiber. Why would I use anything else ever?
Yeah, why would you use the cable? I know that'd be the first thing I'd drop here. Well, that's cool. Well, of course, so this article goes through combining our domains with the BGP protocol for doing some really nifty select and precise blocking and passing of specific traffic between networks, which is going to be covered quite in detail in here with lots of PF rules to help explain what's going on. So if you're a networking guy and you find this stuff fascinating, you definitely should check out this article. There's some neat concepts in there. And in addition, we have links to the YouTube video where there's a BSD Can talk on our domains, which will expand upon the subject a bit more if you've not seen that, as well as we have a couple links to some other related posts about talking about doing some advanced routing with OpenBSD as well. So definitely check those out. It
shows how interesting things you can do with our domains, where it looks like they have the same subnet on two different R domains on the first router. So they're both using the same 10.0.1 subnet. But because they're in separate R domains, they're separate addresses, and then you can route them out and deal with them. And so it can let you deal with the complication of, you have multiple internal networks that are actually using conflicting addressing space. So it looks like there might be some interesting things you could do with that too.
Yeah, you can wire this all crazy. That's pretty cool.
And then it gets into doing interesting stuff with BGP with it as well. If you'd like to learn more about our domains, because even I don't know that much about them, BSDCon last year or the year before, anyway, they have a YouTube video of, I think it was Peter Hessler describing how our domains work. And so you should definitely check out that. And we have a couple other related posts in the show notes if you want to learn more about it.
Correct. Okay. Well, before we head to the interview, folks, we do want to mention our first sponsor this week, which is going to be DigitalOcean, and the obvious address for that is going to be digitalocean.com, so, where you can go and get signed up. And the thing you do want to remember, of course, FreeBSD Now, all one word. Type that in. That's your coupon code. If you already have a DigitalOcean account and you have not redeemed that, do so now. That's a $10 free credit. I mean, come on, 2 months of a free VM, basically, getting
with SSDs.
Just SSDs, a terabyte of traffic. Oh my gosh, it's crazy. So that's just stinking cool. So no reason not to do that, guys. And the fact they support FreeBSD in their droplets is great. The fact that you could even load OpenBSD in there if you'd like, that's really cool too. They make that real easy. They got their access to the virtual console and an API for spinning VMs up and tearing them down and doing all kinds of neat stuff. So DigitalOcean makes that super simple, guys. And if you're not running one, you probably should go ahead and spin one up just to try it out, see what all the fuss is about.
It's a great way to try out FreeBSD if you haven't before, or OpenBSD as well. And because you get the console access, you can always fix it if something goes wrong. And
That's right.
they have some great tutorials over there as well. If you're very new to BSD, instead of running a VM at home that you can't really do much with, you can fire up one in the cloud. Now you have a FreeBSD server out there. You have instructions on how to set it up, and you can make it do many, many useful things.
Very cool.
Whether you want to run a causal core to bounce your IRC connection, or if you want to, set up a little web server or whatever you want to do. We're joined this week by Lee Sharp, who's the project lead for SmallWall. Thank you for coming on the show with us.
Thanks for having me. I'm really appreciative of it.
So the first thing we always ask people is, how did you first get involved with BSD?
Well, actually, it kind of goes way back. Early 90s, I got involved with Solaris because back then Sun ran the internet. And I've been a networking guy from way back. And I didn't really start getting into BSD until I fell into MonoWall. I was doing consulting for a company that was doing internet for hotels, and the proprietary stuff they had available was just junk, but priced like gold. And even though MonoWall didn't cover everything, it covered more of it than the stuff that was supposed to work. And to fill in the gaps, I had to learn a little bit more about BSD, and I worked with some of the developers, and that was my first jump into it. And BSD is a very Unix-like operating system, so it coming from Solaris was not that big of a leap. It was actually a little simpler because Sun had the Sun way of doing things that sometimes was interesting. The toughest part was just getting environments to work in, because at that point there weren't really viable desktops. We're talking back in 2004, 2005. There weren't really any viable BSD desktops as a desktop replacement. So it was a box that you set off to the side. And one of my first major projects with MonoWall was setting up a development environment in FreeBSD 4 so you could actually work on MonoWall and hack it a little bit.
Cool. So specifically SmallWall, could you tell us a little bit about how that got started?
Well, I got started in February when all of a sudden everyone woke up to an email from Manual saying MonoWall was going away, and we all went, "What?"
I still need that.
Yeah, it was just a shock, because MonoWall works, and it just works solid. And realistically, most of us could have kept using MonoWall with no changes. But I also use it for my clients. I do independent consulting, and when you try and sell something to a client, they go to the website and it says this project is dead. They get a little nervous, and just in case other things came down the pipe of vulnerabilities or problems, and sooner or later we'd run out of hardware that was supported by the FreeBSD MonoWall runs on. So a few of us had the same idea at the same time and grabbed a domain name and set up some infrastructure to try and keep the community and see if there was interest. And there was definitely interest. A lot of people got involved fairly quickly. And as I was making really rushed beta releases, people were downloading a lot of them. And then all of a sudden I hit /dot. And wow. That's an experience, I can tell you.
With so many pre-made options like OpenSense and pfSense and so on out there, plus a lot of people rolling firewalls on their own using like our OpenBSD tutorial or FreeBSD tutorials that we've been talking about, why would someone choose to use SmallWall?
Well, actually, that was the question Manuel asked when he decided to close MonoWall. He saw all these other projects and all these other products and different ways of doing things and these new exciting things. And while that is great for a certain type of user, but there were a lot of us that didn't want a kitchen sink firewall. We wanted the old Unix philosophy of do one thing and do it well, something that's small, something that's lean, something that runs on embedded hardware, or if not embedded hardware, small and low-powered hardware, because frankly, having a space heater in your computer room is bad enough with a computer. Adding a few more for firewall is pretty extreme. And another place that it's used a lot is virtually. One of the first things I did with SmallWall was put in the VirtIO drivers so that it could be used in KVM and VirtualBox and and the other open source virtual systems, it's wonderful. I mean, you can throw almost no resources at it at all and have a good, solid firewall in a tiny, tiny, tiny little space. Or if you're just looking at hardware, I brought the firewall that I personally use. Actually, one just like this. It's just an old wise Windows WinTerm server. You can pick them up on eBay for 10, 20 bucks. Throw in a dual port NIC that's, you know, another 10 bucks maybe. And this firewall will do 45 meg all day long for, you know, nothing.
Right.
And no power, and no heat, and no fan.
So what kind of CPU architectures does it support currently?
Right now it's x86 only, not SNMP. I'm sorry, not SNP, not ARM. And there are a number of reasons for that. One of the big difficulties with supporting ARM, if you go to the DD-Word or the Tomato firmware pages and just look up one model of router, you see 500 images because every ARM is different. And you have to manage all these images, and you have to update all these images. And so it takes a huge team of people that never update at the same rate, and you can't keep a consistent level of quality when you have 200 images to keep track of.
Right.
And frankly, we're not CPU bound, so SMP is not a problem. I mean, these are old Geode type processors, and they work fine up to 45 meg. We have Atom systems with Intel NICs in them that I ran an iPerf, and I was getting across the wire, going in and out of SmallWall, 900 meg sustained transfers.
Yep. And
you're not going to get a whole lot of hardware that will do better than that, you know, on your desktop or on your server.
Right.
So it's a good niche, and it's less work than trying to support everything. You know, do one thing and do it well. Here's what we support.
Right. Well, it's just at BSDCon, we organized a group buy of these TP-Link wireless N routers that are MIPS 32, and they have like 8 megs of flash on it and U-boot. So we built custom FreeBSD images and put them on it. But I was just wondering.
I saw that just before I left on vacation. You were talking about the oh god, I forgot what you called it. The little bitty kernel that runs in no space at all. And is itty bitty tiny, and you can put on. I think the whole thing was 8 meg or something.
Yeah,
like that.
There's 8 meg of flash. It's a compressed image, so you actually get about 16 megs of content. But yeah,
I mean, it sounds really cool, and I was really interested in it. Of course, porting over to that would take a lot of work, and we want to do things slowly.
Right.
You know. Chris said when you first were talking about us, what version we were on, he kind of commented on the FreeBSD 8 that we're on right now, going, whoa, that's old. Old is good. It's kind of where we want to be because it is a lot more tested. Yep. It's a lot more secure. When Heartbleed and Shellshock came out, Monowall was not affected at all. Shellshock didn't affect it because it doesn't have a shell. And Heartbleed didn't affect it because actually the
old enough version of OpenSSL. So it didn't have the new feature that caused the problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
and features that aren't there aren't hacked.
Yes.
So.
The downside is that support for FreeBSD 8.4 ends like a month or two from now, and there will be no more security updates for it.
And we are working on FreeBSD 10. Okay. It's a heck of a challenge, though. Monowall was on FreeBSD 4 for a very, very long time and jumped straight to 8. Because FreeBSD 6, the networking was just slower.
Oh.
It took more resources. It took a huge performance hit. We did everything we could to try and make it perform better. We were never able to make 6 perform well, and then 8 came out. And 8... apparently the code was cleaned up quite a bit, and 8 was significantly faster than 6, and so we skipped straight to 8. Now, you're right, not having security patches is scary, but a lot of the patches can be backported. Yep. We have backported some drivers as well.
Yes.
That's the big reason we want to go to 10, is because all this hardware keeps coming out, and backporting drivers is a lot of work. It'll be a whole lot easier when we can go to 10. But right now we don't have a really solid system running on it yet.
Right, because when you're on 10, because it's an actively supported branch, the FreeBSD project will merge the drivers into Sten for you, and then it just patches you have to apply instead of, yeah.
Sorry, I just had someone open the door.
Sorry. So how would one typically administer a SmallWall system? Is it something you do with a web interface or over SSH or?
It is totally through the web interface. And this is one of the big advantages of a roll-your-own type firewall. The web interface is designed to keep you from accidentally making common typos and mistakes. The web interface is designed to make it easy to do things in a secure way, to do things the right way. If you really, really want to do something that's odd, like, for example, multi-netting, you can. We just make that kind of thing hard. You have to do that by downloading the config file, putting in the commands you want to use, and uploading the config file. And the config file, by the way, is a flat XML text file, so you can edit it with anything. If you're using static DHCP assignments, that makes re-IPing your entire scope a 5-minute operation. You download it, you run a search and replace, and you upload it, and boom, everything's on 172.16 now.
Right. Nice. And what about applying software updates?
It also goes through the web GUI. When you enable the web GUI, it creates an additional small RAM disk, uploads the image to the RAM disk, and then writes it to your hard drive. It was designed for CF cards that can't take a lot of writes. The only time your drive image is looked at is during boot, during firmware updates, or when you're saving or loading the config. And so we have new equipment that's running on USB thumb drives because there's no write cycle, no read cycle. It can go for months without ever looking at the hard drive. And so why spend $30 for a CF card when you can spend $3 for a decent USB thumb drive?
Right, and they won't get worn out because you're not doing a lot of reads and writes to them.
Exactly, you're not using it at all. What you're using are the NICs and the CPU, and that's why I always recommend Intel NICs.
Yes.
MIXT PC, the systems they've built, they have one that has Realtek just for the price point. Everything else is Intel because less load on the CPU, better VLAN support, better jumbo frame support, and it takes a lot of the heavy lifting away from the CPU, so you get better performance.
Yep.
And so it's about spending money where it counts and saving money where you can.
Yeah. So what software comes with SmallWall?
It's designed to be a firewall and security appliance. It's not Fortinet, it's not SonicWall, it's not WatchGuard. Speaking of which, I have a pile of those in the back because I've replaced them with this. It's a firewall. So it has your firewall, it has your DHCP and your NAT, which really realistically need to be in a firewall. It has a DNS forwarder. It does support dynamic DNS simply because the best place to put that is on the firewall.
Right.
The firewall knows when its IP address changes first. And then it has the connectivity formats that you need. It has IPsec for point-to-point connections. And I've done IPsec between MonoWall or SmallWall and Cisco and SonicWall and Fortinet. And it's very agnostic. It supports everything, including a lot of protocols that aren't really recommended. They're not really secure. Mm-hmm. But sometimes you're connecting to something that's all you got. It also supports PPTP. Again, PPTP is not secure, but there are ways to make it a little more secure than others, and sometimes that's all you can work because PPTP is on everything. And now, SmallWall, as opposed to MonoWall, our first big change, supports L2TP over L2TP IPsec. So finally, Chromebooks can connect to SmallWall, and those belong in a firewall because that's your endpoint again. It's a routing type situation. It does not do mail filtering. It does not do web filtering. It does do traffic shaping because, in the firewall, it's a good spot. Captive portal, that's access again. That's a good spot to put it. But for my clients that want mail filtering, I point them at Barracuda. They do it better than I can. For people that want web filtering, I will set up a web server with Dan's Guardian and a caching proxy, which again performs better than this than on a firewall.
Right.
Often I'm sorry. Go ahead.
If you're going to set up like a web a caching firewall or something, you going to need storage and stuff that you normally wouldn't even want to include in the router, right?
Exactly. You don't want your web proxy wearing out your firewall either. Most of the time when I have clients with firewall problems, their firewall is struggling, dying on its last legs, and it's doing everything. And the first thing I do is turn off the features that we can move elsewhere, like mail filtering and web proxying, and then their firewall starts to perform. But then they get the big bill for licensing again, and that's when it's time to move to SmallWall.
Yep.
And yes, SmallWall is totally open source, BSD type license. You can use it personally, commercially, whatever you want to do. The only thing you can't abuse is the SmallWall trademark and logo. That's the only thing I reserve. But the code is there. We actually have a tarball of the file system on the website. And you can grab that, download it, look at it, and it's a great learning tool because you can see how the pieces fit together. You can see how they're set up. You can see what's being used. And, it's a good way to look at it and learn.
Cool. So one of the things people really liked about MonoWall was that you didn't need a lot of hardware to use it. And I suppose that's still true with SmallWall. So what kind of specs would you need to be able to push, like, say, a gigabit through it?
Well, this is one of my build servers right here. I specifically use this on purpose because this is about as small as any system that will run MonoWall or SmallWall. And I want to know if it can't be built right away. And so there was a discussion about whether or not it would run in 128 mega RAM. And I have not tested SmallWall in 128 mega RAM. I suspect it will run, but I think the CD-ROM image would have a hard time burning it simply because there wouldn't be enough memory to load the image and write the image. But if you could burn the image on a thumb drive or a CF card or whatever on your desktop and put it in, 128 meg should run, and it may update. I'm not 100% certain, but it's getting towards the edge. If you have a geode processor or better, you're going to be able to get 40, 45 meg comfortably. If you want to get up to gigabit speeds, you're going to need a relatively recent Atom. But to be perfectly honest, you're not going to be able to buy an Atom new that will be too slow to give you decent speeds.
Right.
If it's almost as if you're buying new hardware, you really can't buy new hardware that won't support it. And if you're getting some of these used Wise Wind terminals off the internet, I keep a few of them around because they're handy. It's hard to not be able to support it. If you have at least 256 mega RAM and an x86 processor that is reasonably current, by that I mean 10 years or newer, you're going to be fine for typical consumer internet speeds. Business class, yeah, you're going to want Atom or better.
Right. So are there any areas where SmallWall is currently lacking that you would like help with?
Oh, wow. A lot of people have had a lot of really good ideas, and I love that. I've gone to a great deal of effort to make development as easy as possible, put all the tools out there. I want to help people. Same way people help me. When I started out, I was learning from these guys that have gone on to do some amazing things. I was learning from Chris, and now he runs PFSense and BSD Perimeter and is doing very well. Michael Edema wrote some fantastic documentation, and he split off of the Escosia project, and he's doing very well. Jonathan DeGraves is doing network architecture all over the world, and he's doing very well. And these are the guys that taught me. And I want to share that. I want to pass on that information. So if you have a neat idea and you want to try implementing it, please do get involved. And if it looks good, if it works good, and if enough people want it, rolling it into the code, yeah, I'd love to do it. Some of the things I've thought about doing, and I just haven't had the time to look at yet, is, for example, integrating a tap type interface so you can output directly to an IDS like Security Onion. And so that your virtual firewall that's in your total virtual environment cloud that doesn't actually have any ports can still monitor every single connection going through it. FreeBSD can do it. It's not a technical problem. It's a finding the time to do it problem. Right. I've also wanted to get the VMware drivers integrated into it properly. someone made a monowall image with BMXnet 3 drivers, and it works technically. Perfect. But they used the proprietary drivers that I can't distribute.
Right.
And so it needs to be rebuilt with the OpenVM tools drivers. And, I just haven't had the time. Those kind of things. The web GUI, I've updated a lot of the documentation to make it a lot easier to understand, a lot clearer, but it could probably use a little bit more help, a little bit more understanding. There are features that could easily be implemented in PHP if someone would just take the time to do it, but time is limited. So if you have an idea of something you'd like to see and you have the ability to do it, jump in. If you just have free time and want to help and don't know what to do, documentation is always helpful too.
Yep.
Oh, and the migration to 10. I mean, wow, there's a lot of code to update.
Yep. So if somebody did want to get involved, is there, what's the website, mailing list, IRC channel, etc.?
Okay, the forum is, the website is www.smallwall.org, and it is .org. .com is a company that makes paint chips or something. I'm not really sure. But smallwall.org is the website. On there you find links to everything. The forum is smallwall.freeforums.net, I think. It was set up when we first were starting. It was something I could set up quick and cheap. And actually, it's pretty darn good. So we haven't had the need to move yet. And I don't see it coming anytime soon. Getting on the forums is probably the best way. My email is posted all over the website, so if people have direct questions, I am reachable. But the forums are probably the best way to start, because that's where everybody's discussing everything, everybody's figuring it out, and everybody's brainstorming. And if you need ideas, boy, they're asking for everything.
Yep.
We'd love to have you come.
Cool. Was there anything else you wanted to mention?
I think that's everything. Just we're not going to be the flashiest. We're not going to be the newest. We're not going to be bleeding edge at all, because to be bleeding edge, you have to bleed. Slow, methodical changes, and a nice, lean, elegant system, and give it a try. I think it still has a place in the IT environment today.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much for coming and talking to us.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Okay, time for the news roundup, folks. But of course, before we do that, we briefly want to mention another one of our sponsors this week, which is going to be iXsystems. And the URL for that, iXsystems.com/BSD Now, where you can go and download their free guide to what you need to know when you're purchasing a server for open source. Things that you should probably be asking your upstream vendors, the right questions to ask, right terms, etc. And iXsystems is going to help you throughout the whole way. Now, I know you have the website up here, Alan, but have you ordered a new server yet? Do we have anything new coming?
I'm in the process of ordering 3 new servers.
Ooh, okay.
One
fancy?
One with 36 6-terabyte helium drives, and then another pair that just have 24 regular SATA drives each times 2.
Okay. Nice. And of course, iXsystems hopefully is giving you the white glove treatment the whole way and making that happen.
It should work out to 180 terabytes of usable storage. 380 terabytes of usable storage. So actual storage would be like 400 and some odd terabytes of ridiculousness. Yeah.
Well, make sure you mention to them, we got to get pictures of your servers before they ship them off, right? So we can display those on the show, because it's just cool to see the new hardware, shiny new hardware rolling off the
videos
line.
of the server being put together and so on would be great.
That would be really cool. Well, awesome. Well, guys, you know the company, you know the name. It's iXsystems.com/BSD Now. Go there and let them know that we sent you. We'd appreciate that.
To kind of list the reasons why I use iX right there on the site. It's like, because I don't want to miss my deadline, right? I'm getting rack space in the data center to put these servers in, and I know the date when that's going to be ready. And so being able to order from iX and know that my servers will arrive on time and not end up, paying for this rack space is going to sit empty while I wait for the servers, definitely makes me feel a lot better. And knowing that I can trust iX to handle the kind of fancy shipping I'll need to get it to the data center, but with all the right markings and ticket numbers and so on, so that when it gets to the data center, they know that it's mine and that it goes in this rack, and that be like, I don't know what this is. Why are we accepting this giant package? And I know that, I send the server to the data center, they can rack it, plug in the power, and it's just going to work because IX has already tested it on their end before they shipped it to me. And that
They definitely provision the systems right.
And,
so it's ready to
fill
go.
out this configuration worksheet, and they'll install the OS and configure it all for me. I can give them the IP addresses and everything, so they just plug it in and hands off, and I don't end up paying for remote hands hours or having to drive to the data center to set it up.
Okay. Well, nice. Okay.
And over on their blog, they have talking about their schwanky new logo.
That's right. I had to switch that on the PCBSD website here. They do have a fancy new logo now, which is up, and I'm sure that's going to be on all the new systems, so we can tell the earlier generation iXsystems versus the newer ones.
Yes. So
nice. I got to get a new one. I need a new logo on my data shed.
Yes.
Right. There we go. Okay. Well, let's get into the news here. So first up, we have Solaris, of all things we're talking about. This is a little weird, but hey, they're adopting a lot more BSD goodies. So we mentioned this on a previous episode that Oracle developers had been importing a current version of OpenBSD's PF firewall into their next version of Solaris, and they've even been contributing back patches for SMP and other bug fixes. Well, they recently published an article about PF talking about what's different about it on their platform compared to others, which isn't especially useful for BSD users specifically, but it's interesting read if you like to know what's going on.
It's definitely interesting to see that they didn't port PF sync, which is the part you would use, especially if you have two routers that are redundant and using CARP or whatever. Without PF sync, you're not synchronizing the state table. So if all my traffic is going through router number 1, and then it goes down and I switch to router number 2, it doesn't know about all my currently open connections and they'll all get closed. Whereas if you have PF sync, the second router already knows about them and everything just fails over flawlessly.
Did they say why they didn't port that
No,
over?
they haven't talked about that yet. I'm guessing they're just...
Interesting. Wonder if they have their own implementation or something.
If they don't have CARP, I suppose it doesn't make any sense.
Sure, yeah.
But I think it's just that, they're more focused on getting PF working than anything else to start.
Sure.
They don't have NAT64, but, that's not many people using that at the moment. They don't have the packet queuing or QoS stuff, the flow stats, divert sockets, or policy-based routing, and a few other small features.
Okay. Well, interestingly enough, we have now here Darren Moffat, who was originally part of getting an SSH implementation at Solaris, now has a second blog post about their upcoming Sun SSH fork. So they said going forward, their next version is actually going to be to offer a completely vanilla OpenSSH option as well, with the plan being to phase out Sun SSH sometime after that.
That's good.
So the article he talks a little bit about the history of getting SSH into the OS, how they forked the code, and also lists some of the differences between the two. And then the new system here that are in a third blog post now, we even have them talking about how they're borrowing get entropy from OpenBSD, as well as the addition of arc4random to their libc. So definitely lifting a lot of cool stuff out of OpenBSD here. This is neat. So now they have an up-to-date SMP-capable PF. They have ZFS with native encryption, jail-like zones, unaltered OpenSSH, and secure entropy. Gosh, is Solaris becoming one of us? What is going on here?
It's pretty interesting to see them, getting caught up on a lot of this stuff. Although, while they have native encryption on their ZFS, everything else their ZFS kind of seems behind now. It's missing a lot of the stuff that we get from Open ZFS now. So maybe they'll be smart and
they'll start pulling Open ZFS or something and contribute their encryption.
Well, important, yes. If they start contributing things back, then we can maybe get back to one true ZFS.
That would be nice. So I guess somebody's going to have to do a Solaris Now podcast and talk about all the BSD tech going into there. Yep. Cool. Okay, well, next up, the next big conference, we got a Euro is coming up here. So 2015, now their talks and tutorials, it looks like they've started posting a preliminary list of some of the things that are going to be happening over in Sweden this year. The conference is going to be beginning of October, for those that don't know. And I'm sure, Alan, I'll let you read through the list here of the preliminary presentations we got happening here soon. But a couple things here. First of all, the list looks pretty well balanced between a lot of the different BSDs. So that's something that Paul Schenkeveld would have been happy to see if he was still with us. So that's nice to see that that's happening. And we even have an interesting Dragonfly BSD talk, a couple talks from NetBSD developers, and usual to the traditional FreeBSD and OpenBSD ones, of course. So you want to go through some of the ones we got here, some of the highlights?
A really interesting one I wanted to see is why OpenBSD matters in the healthcare industry. Because we don't often hear much from the IT people in the healthcare industry. Then there's raceless network configuration. So that's interesting because normally, how do you deal with a packet that's coming in while you're changing the IP address on the interface and stuff like that? Henning Bauer is doing his OpenBSD sucks talk that he gave at EuroBSDCon. That was quite interesting to see where OpenBSD was and how, what issues they had acknowledged with it. And he had a big set of slides in there about the SMP stuff, and I'm guessing that'll be updated with how many more things have been got out from underneath that giant lock. So it'll be a good status update. Then we have attacking FreeBSD networking protocols, why, how, and the results. Ted Unanx is giving cryptography in OpenBSD and talking about that. George Neville Neal and Jim Thompson are doing measure twice, code once. That was a very interesting talk that was at BSDCon. Kirk McCusick is doing a brief history of the BSD fast file system. So the original history of UFS and, even FFS, the part of it that's even in OpenBSD. So that'll be very interesting to hear, every one of Kirk's history talks are always amazing. So
how does he cram all that into a talk? There's so much of this history. Wow.
FreeBSD on ARM64, FreeBSD TLS and crypto performance improvements. PortRoach, which is the OpenBSD dist file scanner. It's kind of like Port Scout from FreeBSD. It basically scans the ports tree and finds newer versions of the programs that are out there by looking for newer dist files on the FTP sites. And if they exist, notify the maintainer and be like, hey, there's a newer version of this port. You should probably update your port. Scott Long is talking about multi-queue I/O in FreeBSD using LSI controllers and NVMe, which is... NVMe is the idea of non-volatile memory express. It's basically what we normally do with an SSD is take some flash memory and make it pretend to be a hard drive. But there's certain bottlenecks from the fact that hard drives were designed around the limitations of a hard drive. So with NVMe, you're exposing the flash in such a way that it doesn't have to pretend to be a hard drive. And so you can get even better performance. So basically, it's a bunch of flash on a PCI Express card that doesn't have to pretend to be a hard drive, and so you get even more interesting performance out of it.
Crazy performance out of that,
Ingo's giving a Mandoc update. There's an OpenBSD soft RAID and booting off of it, which is interesting. The BSD license SASL library, which is interesting. Ed Schouten will be talking about Cloud ABI. There's synchronization of userland sources among the BSDs. This is Seven Janian, and that's a very interesting topic. I could definitely,
for sure.
Getting those to be more close together is definitely appealing. Then Jordan Hubbard is giving Making FreeBSD More Dynamic, a year of hacking on asynchronous and centralized interfaces. So turning BSD into macOS. Masio is giving a talk called Config, Rethinking the Kernel Build. I'm not sure which kernel he's referring to there, but Francois Turgeot from Dragonfly is talking about state of the graphics stack in Dragonfly. I'm sure you would really like to see that one.
Yeah, I'll catch the video of that one for sure.
Baptiste is talking about Poudriere and efficient package building. Having used Poudriere a lot in the last 2 weeks to start catching up some stuff, I'm definitely a fan of the tool. Arun Thomas is talking about RISC-V, the Berkeley hardware for your Berkeley software. There's also an interesting talk, a vacuum tube-based computer that runs BSD.
Because why not?
That's definitely sounds cool. There's also tricky issues in file systems and protobufs for kernel and user interfaces. So it's definitely looking like Sweden's going to be a good time.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of stuff
Plus,
happening.
They've confirmed the keynotes will be Paul Vixie and Patrick Frostrom. who's one of the very early internet adopters in Sweden. So both those keynotes sound interesting as well.
Well, and additionally, it looks like they've announced 4 of the tutorials so far, which we have Kirk McCusick doing the intro to the FreeBSD, open source operating system. That's going to be a 2-day, split into 4 half-day sections. So that's going to be an awesome one.
Yeah, that's like a condensed down version of his 14-week college course.
Yeah, that's cool. Ingo's going to be doing a Mandoc tutorial. That's a half-day. We got G. Clifford Williams doing a DevOps on BSD tutorial. That's a full day. And Peter Hanstein doing a Building the Network You Need with OpenBSD's PF tutorial, which will also be a half-day. So as we see more things get added to these lists, we will, of course, bring them to you in a future episode. But also, it looks like registration for the event is going to be opening pretty soon. They're saying likely this week or the next. So keep your eyes open for that so you can get your registration in early.
Cool.
Okay, well, next up in the news here, ZFS replication to offsite for backups.
Yes.
So, of course, if you take your backup seriously, you've probably been using ZFS and keeping an offsite copy of the data. So this article is going to cover how you would do just that, but with a focus on making use of the replication capability properly. It's going to walk you through taking snapshots of your pool and then, of course, replicating that to a remote system using, why not, ZFS send and, of course, SSH. But the nice thing is this has the benefit of only transferring the files that have changed since the last time you did it, or more specifically, the blocks. Also, steps are also taken to show how a regular user can take and manage the snapshots.
Yes.
So you don't necessarily need to be root for the SSH data transfer, which
exactly.
is pretty cool.
It's using the ZFS delegation framework, which ZFS allow to allow a regular user to create the snapshots and do the send, receive, and so on, so that you can do everything without root access.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. That's how we do our backups with Live Preserver from my desktop to the FreeNAS box. Because the FreeNAS box, I'm not SSHing in as root or anything. It's just a user. And I've delegated, you have access to this, and that's the data set for receiving snaps, which is pretty cool.
We do the same thing for the PCBSD package set on the scale engine mirrors. We have a unprivileged user that just pushes the FreeBSD files around all the servers.
Okay. And it looks like, of course, he talks about data integrity. That, of course, is a long process. We have file system level checksums. We have the resistance to hardware failure. He talks about ECC memory, doing multiple copies in different locations. So there's all sorts of different things you can do to improve your reliability. Don't skip out on any of them if possible. One of the things the author didn't mention in his post was having an offline copy of the data, though, sealed in a safe place, also important. So for a while, I was doing that, Alan. I just had an external SATA enclosure, and I would mirror it, sync it up, mirror it, and then take that off and redo that every so often. So it was one way to do it.
Yeah, and I looked at, for the ZFS book, we started talking about some practices like that of, build your system with 3 or 4 deep mirrors, and then take one drive from each mirror set offline, and basically rotate a set of hard drives like tapes. So once a week, you pull out the last set of hard drives, and you put in a new set of hard drives, and you archive the first set. And then the second week, you do that again, and third week again. And eventually, on the 4th or 5th week, you put the very first set of hard drives back in to avoid needing an infinite number of hard drives.
Yeah, you just rotate them like we used to have our weekly tapes, 7 days worth.
And so then basically, because you have one disk from every VDEV or one disk from every mirror, you can actually plug just that one set of disks into another machine and bring up your pool from how it looked exactly at the point where you pulled the hard drives out. You can synchronize that a little bit by using the ZFS offline command to make all those drives be exactly at the same time. But it's definitely an interesting way to do it if you need that level of stuff. Or, at Scale Engine, we just have the live replica and we grandfather the snapshots, so we always have older snapshots.
That is definitely cool. Okay. Well, next up here, we have block encryption in OpenBSD. So we got a blog article talking about that. So, of course, we've talked about and covered different things about full disk encryption before. We've got even a tutorial on that, so you can take a look. And we've talked about doing that in OpenBSD and FreeBSD before, but that often is going to require you dedicate a whole drive or partition to the sensitive data. So this blog post is going to take you through the process of creating encrypted containers in OpenBSD, kind of a la TrueCrypt style. That is, you have a file-backed virtual device with an encrypted file system. So this article is going to go through how you would create a file that looks like random data, you point a vn-config at it, setting up the crypto, and finally you set it up as a fake storage device. So, of course, the encrypted container method offers, obviously, the advantage of being a bit more portable across installations in other ways. You can just kind of take that file and plop it somewhere else and import it. But definitely a cool way to do that. Anything you wanted to add on this one, Al?
No, it's just something you could do with, you could actually have like a FAT32 formatted USB stick, and one of the files on it would be one of these soft RAID containers. Your limitation there will be the file size. Each container can only be so big because of FAT32 limitations, but
sure,
it's definitely one of the options in order to kind of have something a little more portable. It would be nice if we kind of had one common way to do it across all the BSDs, but
right. Well, everybody's got different underlying technologies and ways they do it. So
yeah, I just
like
wonder
the way
if,
I mess around with it here is like Jelly with ZFS on top. But then if I want to give myself more space, I can attach a new Jelly device to the ZFS and then expand Jelly.
Yep.
And like there's all kinds of crazy magic you can do to make that work.
I wonder if Jelly could be separated enough from the geom stuff in order to just like implement the Jelly encryption,
like the crypto,
just the crypto part, so other
hey,
operating
shoot,
systems.
If Grub's got a Jelly, implementation, you'd think we could get it in some of the other
right,
BSDs.
because it's just built on geom to save a lot of code, but you just have to rewrite, the parts of geom that actually deal with reading and writing the blocks to the disk and so on.
Okay.
Yeah, that could be an
Definitely
interesting
cool.
project.
Definitely.
Port Jelly to
I know
other
somebody
operating
needs
systems.
to do that and then write a talk about it. Go to a conference. That could be your ticket to get to one of these conferences. Just port Jelly to NetBSD, OpenBSD, and Dragonfly, and then we all have one encryption system to rule them all.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, next up, speaking of a little bit different type of container, we have some interesting news here about Docker hitting the FreeBSD ports tree. And of course, I should read this entirely in the third person, but yeah, I committed that. So the inevitable, of course, has happened, and now we have an early FreeBSD port of Docker finally here in the FreeBSD ports tree. So first up, I put that in, but I don't take any credit for it. That's actually done by a couple other guys who are working on porting Docker over to FreeBSD. I just rolled the port bits for it. But we have some links to some of the details and directions on how you can mess around with it. If you'd like to give it a try, what features work, what doesn't. And we even have a link to a Hacker News discussion here on that landing. So,
but looking at the list of subcommands, almost all of them work.
Yeah, it's pretty darn close. It actually works pretty well. So for those who don't know, what I've messed around with it here is running FreeBSD containers works quite well. Obviously, it's just like running a FreeBSD jail. It's even using a lot of the jail subsystem. Does things with ZFS, the whole 9 yards. So pretty stinking cool. There's one or two bits that aren't working properly yet. It doesn't copy the resolve.conf from the host into the container yet, so you have to set that up in your container so you can get out properly and resolve addresses. So that's a little bit minor annoyance. And there's a really ugly kludge in the service startup to set up PF to do forwarding and all that for NAT, which is unfortunate, but Docker will eventually, the hope is the port will do that all internally, right? Because that's, I guess, how they do it on Linux with IP tables and whatnot. It's setting those. So eventually that'll go away. But in addition, if you're on FreeBSD Current, something really, really recent, and you have the new Linux emulation stuff, you can then load up the Linux 64 KO and try running containers from Linux as well. So I ran some Docker CentOS here, and heck, it just worked. It's just pretty cool. So, of course, that's going to be hit or miss depending on what particular Linux binaries you're using and if we have all the proper system calls available
but
in the
almost
Linux emulation layer.
Everything should work.
It's getting there. It's getting there. I got some complaints on some of the containers about the Linux kernel version being too old and this and that. That's why I think I had pinged you on IRC asking like what the current version was. Yeah. And I fiddled around with those settings a little bit. But it works well enough to play with. And that was kind of the hope by getting this in the ports tree. It gives more people an opportunity to start playing with it, seeing what works, what doesn't, and hopefully motivate people to contribute back and get involved.
Our Linux emulation's getting well ahead now. Thanks a lot to Dimitri for doing all the work.
Yeah, he's done an excellent job getting some of that stuff working there. So I'd love to see that continue on. And eventually we reach a point where it doesn't matter. You just, Docker grab this from Linux and deploy it on your FreeBSD box now. Now it's running in the jail subsystem and on ZFS and just everything works. I mean, how cool would that
basically,
be?
these are just prepackaged jails, right?
Essentially. So I guess the best ways I've heard it described is it's basically the jail system, but with a fancier wrapper around it for creating repos, pushing, pulling, and then you start doing things like dividing containers into different groups, where this group can talk to this group, and you can talk to this guy, and so forth and so on. But definitely slick. But try it out if you're a Docker guy or you're coming from the Linux world. Like I said, it's something at least worth giving a poke at. Even if you're not going to use the Linux stuff, the FreeBSD Docker stuff works pretty well also. So
who doesn't want their Dockers to run on ZFS, right? So
that's right. So no reason not to. I know we are even doing some work now to port over things like Flocker and stuff, which lets you like manage your different Docker containers in the cloud and move things around, and it's pretty slick. So I think that uses ZFS as well. So there's a whole class of tools we could eventually port over to do some neat stuff there. Okay, so next up we have Microsoft in the news. What is this? But it looks like Microsoft has donated to OpenSSH. And we have a link to the Deadly article here. But we've talked about, of course, there's lots of big businesses out there using BSD, and some of them contribute back. Some even mentor, and a few other large public donations have come up, and now it's Microsoft's turn. So with the recent decision to integrate OpenSSH into an upcoming Windows, Microsoft has donated a large sum of money to the OpenBSD Foundation, making them a gold-level sponsor. That's interesting. Mm-hmm. They've also posted some contract work offers on the OpenSSH mailing list and say their changes will be upstreamed if appropriate. So we're glad to see that Microsoft's getting involved there and kind of reaching out to the open source community. Okay, time for feedback from you guys out in the audience. But before we go to our first question, of course, we do want to mention Tarsnap this week, guys. Come on, Tarsnap makes this easy. It's tarsnap.com/BSD Now. You can go and get signed up, have an account done here before we finish reading the first question, because it is a little bit long. So you'll have time to make your account, get set up. The instructions are super simple. If you've ever used tar before, it's a tar-like interface. So come on, how easy is that? Next thing you know, all your backups are done in the cloud, fully encrypted, but before they even leave your box. Okay. So very cool with all the deduplication stuff, just things that just work.
It uses very little bandwidth and costs very little money. So why aren't you using it already?
That's right. I know, right? And you don't have any excuse if you're super paranoid, because Tarsnap really is for the super paranoid. Yes. Gosh, go look at the code yourself. Exactly. It's all available. You can even find a bug. They reward you. There's a whole setup of tiers of different rewards you can get if you can find a bug or a typo or whatever. Yep. So definitely go check out tarsnap.com and see how you can use that for your personal backups now, or your business, or everything in between. Okay, so first up we got Joe this week, who writes in asking about DNS mask and IPFW. So he says, hey, I followed Chris's blog post on setting up an IPFW home-based router. It works great. To replace my home router, though, I need DNS and DHCP. So he said, I tried setting up DNS mask, but I'm having trouble with the DNS part. It should be pretty easy, so I'm not sure where I'm going wrong. Maybe you could expand your tutorial with the DNS DHCP part of it. I may have to do that at some point. Just need to find a little time to sit and write that. So he says the first way he tried to go was the ISC DHCP server with Unbound, and I pretty much had that working, except I didn't want to have to manually create host entries for everything on my network. The problem I've been running into is getting something to automatically create host entries for my LAN devices. So maybe you know of a better way to do that, and he lists below his DNSmask.conf.
Oh, I've never really bothered with that.
Yeah, me neither. Honestly, this isn't something
the DNS server I usually set up on a router just forwards off to my ISP or Google or whatever, kind of like what he has here at the bottom of his config.
Correct. So then he lists why it's not auto-populating anything. He said basically he has a home router 192.168.1.1 connected to Comcast. Then he has his laptop, TrueOS firewall, VirtualBox VMs, etc. And then he has an PCBSD box pulling from DHCP. He said he can't resolve DNS names on his little fake LAN. Yeah, honestly, that's not something I've ever had to mess with before. I point mine at OpenDNS and go that way.
Yeah, well, so Unbound, normally, you don't really, it's not really I don't think Unbound supports like dynamic update, having the DHCP server tell the DNS server, hey, this new host is now on this IP address. I think you'd have to use bind to get that. And then it's just using the dynamic update feature in the ISC DHCPD.
So maybe somebody will write up with a little tutorial on that. We'd be happy to pass that along to you, Joe, in a future episode. But he also talks about he decided to use ISC DHCPD server following the post and Unbound for DNS, and it seems to be working okay, except, of course, the DNS entries he puts into Unbound it looks like they do resolve for his LAN, and then he lists his config here.
Yeah, that was the part I was looking at.
Yeah. Okay. Well, again, if somebody else has more experience with this or has a recipe for this to make it go, send it in to us, because this is not something I've had to set up, and it sounds like you haven't either, Alan.
So next up, Mike writes in about C states on FreeBSD. He says, hi, guys. I was hoping you guys could explain that info about C states that we talked about the previous week. He says, I seem to be having stability issues with power, specifically the EDID values not being recovered for his DisplayPort monitors. I don't think that's related to C states. He says, what seems to happen is after turning off and then on, my screen video display becomes all shifted. It's basically out of sync, and he has to reboot to get it to come back. He says switching TTYs and then switching back doesn't help, or turning it off and on and so on. He says the weirdest thing, he's never seen this before, and he's currently using an E3 1246 V3 on a Supermicro X10 motherboard with an ATI display card. So C states are how the processor can go to sleep for fractions of a second, basically. So it's different levels of sleep to save a little bit of power, especially for battery or even just for regular use. It's different than the P states that you would normally use for, if you suspend the machine or something. So the C states shouldn't have anything to do with problems with your monitor, although it could be some of the other power management stuff. So if you're putting the machine to sleep, or if the monitor automatically turns off after 15 minutes or whatever. I don't have much experience with using BSD as that kind of a desktop.
Sure. So the only thing I would say is DisplayPort did give me some trouble. I'm on the NVIDIA side, but I noticed when the monitor would go to sleep, and then I would move the mouse or wake the system up or whatever, it would redetect as a new monitor every time. Really annoying. And then that was only when I was connected with DisplayPort.
Yeah,
I did not see that with DVI or
something
HDMI.
to do with DisplayPort, because if I turn off my second monitor, all the windows that are on it get moved over to my first monitor as if that monitor didn't exist anymore.
Yeah, like it's been disconnected.
Yeah. And I think, DisplayPort just acts a little differently than other display technologies when you power a monitor off. So it might be X just getting very confused by the number of monitors you have changing frequently.
Yeah, I would check. I know you said the only thing that fixes it is rebooting, but I wonder if you log out of your X session and X restarts, if that kicks it and it comes back on, if you don't have to do the full reboot. And then maybe look in your varlog xorg.log when it wakes up, see if there's anything funky in there. That'd be at least a starting place to look.
DisplayPort is definitely interesting, and I like the fact that I can hook up lots of monitors, but it does seem to act slightly differently when I'm doing different things.
It has a new set of quirks. Yep. Okay, well, next up we have a Randy who writes in asking about NAT versus gaming. Yes. He said, a few weeks ago I followed the excellent guide on setting up an OpenBSD router. He said, I love the new setup, but it broke a couple things that I haven't figured out how to solve yet. He said, my wife and I play Xbox Live together, 2 360 consoles, 2 screens, 1 couch. Getting 2 consoles on the same LAN working is a bit complicated. He said, with my old setup, I had to connect 1 console to my edge router from my ISP and another to the inner DD-WRT router to make them work. He said, I have no idea why that was necessary, but it worked, so I didn't touch it. He said, with PF, both consoles work when connected directly to the inner OpenBSD router, with one exception. We can't join a party to chat with other people while we play. He said, I've been working on this for several days. I now hate NAT with a passion. NAT breaks FTP, PPTP, VPNs, gaming. Here's the problem as I understand it. I've learned that PF defaults to symmetric NAT, which replaces the port number with a random port, as well as replacing the local IP on the outbound packets. Most routers use cone-shaped NAT, which leaves the port number intact. He said, when I create a party, Xbox uses stun to determine its public IP and port. This is provided other people will try to join. When someone joins, the first attempt fails because the inbound connection is unsolicited. So the Xbox servers will pass a message to my console asking it to try initiating the connection. At this point, the joining console will try again to connect to the address and the port provided by Stun. With the cone-shaped NAT, this works because the port detected by Stun is still valid. But this fails with symmetric NAT because the port for each connection is random, and the console has no way to determine what it'll be for the future connection. He said, so I added a static port keyword to PF's config, making it use cone-shaped NAT. Right away, I could join a party and chat with other people. But now only one console can connect to the Xbox Live at once. Oh. He said, I tried. Right?
The wording seems a little off because symmetric means the same on both sides. So that's what I would expect in the static NAT, where you have the same port number on the inside and the outside. But yeah, I can. The static one is supposed to try to keep the same port, but if the second Xbox trying to use the same port, it would get changed. So I don't know why it would stop the second one from working.
Interesting. He said, I tried moving one console to my edge router from ISP and leaving the other one connected to my inner OpenBSD router, the configuration that used to work with the DWRT, but this didn't change anything. He said connecting both consoles to the edge router with UPnP enabled doesn't work either. The only way I'm able to get both consoles online is by using symmetric NAT. The number of people trying to use multiple consoles on one LAN is very small. The number of people who know anything about networking seems to be zero. All Google came up with is enable UPnP and reboot everything. Yeah, that is frustrating. He said UPnP might be able to get this working, but it makes me wince. I didn't just install OpenBSD so I can let some proprietary Microsoft device make arbitrary changes to my firewall. Yeah, I hear you there, man. He said, I really wish Xbox would let me choose a couple ports for it to use for all its incoming traffic. I could create static rules just like for my web servers, and then all this madness would go away. Do you guys have any experience for this or ideas that I can try? And then he lists his PF rules he's using copied from the tutorial. Well, any thoughts on that? I know this is the frustration I've had too with the Wii U, getting the kids all up and running. And yeah, I raged about that a few weeks ago.
Yes. The static port should definitely solve the problem. I don't know why the second one would suddenly stop working. At that point, it'd be handy to have log lines from when it is working and so on. But I wonder if you can match based on the source IP address of the Xboxes, if you can have one static and one not, and see what happens then.
Sure.
But it's interesting that you can play using the remapped port numbers. It's just that you can't join the party line, basically.
The party, which is, I think, when multiple people are doing peer-to-peer to connect to you. Right, well, that's interesting. Maybe somebody out there, since, as he said, Google has been very unhelpful in this case, maybe we have another listener who's a network expert who can tell us an alternative way to do this or why his particular configuration isn't working. Okay. I know I had some folks suggest to me UPnP. You could do some things to help secure it, lock it down to only a static IP address that your console's on, and only that address can open up ports to itself and whatnot. But yeah, I know I never even implemented that. I still just don't like the idea of having it on the network at all.
Yeah. So it's a static port with NAT rules. The static port option prevents PF from modifying the source port on TCP and UDP packets, keeping it the same. So I wonder if it doesn't deconflict if there is a conflict. Huh.
Okay. You want to punt this one out and see if anyone in the community comes up with
somebody
something?
can help you out.
Email us at feedback@bsdnow.tv if you have any.
I don't have any gaming consoles.
Right? You're only a PC guy, right, Alan? PC games? Okay. By the way, I pre-ordered my Fallout 4. Very happy. Cool. Got the Pip-Boy edition, right?
Whatever that is.
Okay. Next up, we have Tony, who writes in about 64-bit emulation. He says, will running the Linux version of Chrome along with its current version of Flash be possible with the upcoming 64-bit support? He's talking about the FreeBSD Linux emulation layer. That's a good question.
Guessing
Have we
Chrome
asked
is
Dimitri
going to be...
or seen anyone try run it yet?
I'm guessing Chrome is going to be using a lot of Linux-specific features, so I don't know. Because there's no port of Chrome to FreeBSD, right? It's just Chromium.
Yeah, you'd be running you'd be running their closed source Google provided one that has the Pepper API Flash plugin and all that. I have a current box sitting right here on my desk. I may have to try that and get back to you, Tony, and see if it runs or what fails, or maybe somebody will ping me on IRC in the next minute, and I'll answer that for you. But I've not tested it. I assume once enough of the syscalls are there, then it would work. I just don't know if the current set in current is enough to make that go yet or not. He said also, if any BSD hacker could port Infinality to FreeBSD or PCBSD, he or she would be my hero. I think Klang may have complicated this, but I really don't know how much about how that works.
Well, when you get stuff from the port straight, you can have it compiled with GCC if it won't work with Klang, so that's not a problem. So
this is like a font rendering library and whatnot, and I took a look. We just need somebody to port it over. I really don't have the time, otherwise I'd try it myself. But if somebody out there would like to make a port, take a look at this. Looks like an interesting project. And if it really does make the fonts that much better, shoot, I want it. So let's bring it over. He says, you guys are doing a great job on the show. He said, I listen to more BSD news than Linux now. So he said, so far, it's mainly the two things I mentioned that are keeping me hooked on Arch. Well, hopefully we can solve one or both these.
Okay.
Right? Well, he wants the latest version of Flash, right? I know some people, it's like, especially some sites will not move off of Flash yet, which is really annoying. But oh well. Okay, next up we have Kevin. He said, hey guys, I enjoy using Arch Linux, PCBSD, and OpenBSD. What's the best way to configure a USB flash drive for read-write access on all three OS platforms? Interesting. He says, what about encryption? I know PCBSD has PersonaCrypt, OpenBSD has BioCTL, and Linux has a lot of options such as Lux. What's the best way to encrypt a file system that works across all three? Thanks. Love the show. What would be the best one to use at this point?
Basically, you have to use like FAT32 and no encryption.
Yeah, I say encryption, no, because like TrueCrypt being gone.
Dragonfly has a Lux compatible thing, right? DMCrypt.
I think so.
Somebody should port that to Geli or to Geom.
Right, and just have that show up on all.
Yeah. The problem is that if you have Lux, you're most likely using ext4 or something that FreeBSD doesn't do a great job of at the moment.
Yeah, so it'd have to be FAT32 with, all right.
Yeah.
But yeah, FAT32 is still the way to go. I mean, I've had some people try it with NTFS.
If it was just Arch and PCBSD,
luck.
ZFS works between Linux and BSD, and it's very good and handles different operating systems and versions and hardware very well. But, that's not going to work on OpenBSD.
I don't know if they have an NTFS read-write or Fuse that can do that.
I don't know.
So I've had some people do that with some varying degrees of success, which is ugly, I know, to run NTFS of all things, but it works, and they needed to work on Windows too.
Well, the bigger advantage to NTFS over FAT32 is having files bigger than like 2 gigabytes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, hopefully we answered your question there, and maybe somebody will write in with some more information about that, Kevin. Okay. So as we wrap up the show, just a couple things we want to mention here, folks. First up, feedback at bsdnow.tv. That's where you send everything. Send us stuff there so we can get it in a future episode. Of course, we're always looking for interviews, so don't be shy. We're not scary. We make this real easy. Get in touch with us if you're doing anything cool on any of the BSDs that you'd like to talk about, or if you want to suggest or nominate somebody else, do that too, and we'll try and get in touch with them and make that happen. And also, as we close here, we do want to mention one thing, a sad thing here about the FreeNAS community. It recently lost one of their most active members, Marbus90, who has been a big help to them for a long time, who sadly passed away recently here. And we have a link to the article on the FreeNAS forum. So rest in peace, and thank you for all your work you've done with FreeNAS there. And definitely go take a look at that link if you've been involved with the FreeNAS community in any way.